There are mistakes that follow you quietly, not loudly, not dramatically, just constantly. You wake up, move through your day, answer messages, finish work, smile at people, and somewhere underneath all of it, there's still that voice reminding you of what you did wrong. Maybe it was something you said in anger. Maybe it was someone you pushed away when they were trying to love you. Maybe it was a decision you made too quickly. Maybe it was years spent hiding parts of yourself because you didn't know how to face them. And even after time passes, shame has a way of making the past feel current. You can be standing in a completely different life and still feel emotionally trapped in an old moment. A sentence, a memory, a look on someone's face. Sometimes it only takes one small reminder for everything to come rushing back again. And what hurts the most is not always the mistake itself. Sometimes it's the way you changed afterward. You became harder on yourself, more cautious, more afraid of disappointing people, more afraid of being fully seen. You started replaying conversations in your head long after they ended. You started apologizing too much. You started carrying this invisible pressure to make up for who you used to be. And eventually, guilt stopped feeling temporary. It became part of your identity. You stopped saying, "I made a bad decision." Instead, deep down, you started believing, "There must be something wrong with me." That is the exhausting part of shame. It slowly turns human mistakes into permanent self-rejection. So even when life keeps moving, a part of you stays emotionally stuck in the past. You laugh with people while secretly criticizing yourself. You achieve things, but struggle to feel proud of them. You receive kindness and immediately wonder if you deserve it. And sometimes, late at night, when everything becomes quiet, your mind returns to the same place again. The same regret, the same memory, the same question. Why did I do that? You wish you could go back with the knowledge you have now. You wish you could respond differently, choose differently, be different. But the painful truth is that you cannot rewrite the moment once it has passed. And maybe that's why so many people keep punishing themselves. Because punishment feels like control. If you keep hurting over it, maybe it proves you understand the damage. Maybe it proves you care. Maybe it proves you're not the same person anymore. But carrying shame for years does not heal the past. It only teaches you how to live without peace. And after a while, you begin to realize something important. You have spent so much time condemning yourself that you no longer know how to speak to yourself with kindness. Not excuses, not denial, just kindness. Because somewhere along the way, you confused self-hatred with accountability. And now you carry the weight of your past everywhere you go, even into moments that were never meant to hurt. A lot of people stay attached to shame because, in a strange way, it feels safer than healing. If you keep blaming yourself, maybe it means you're taking responsibility. If you keep replaying the past, maybe it means you truly understand the pain you caused. If you keep hurting over it, maybe it proves you've changed. So without realizing it, you turn guilt into a daily routine. You revisit old conversations. You think about what you should have said differently. You imagine different endings over and over again, hoping somehow the pain will finally loosen its grip. But it never really does, because shame doesn't know when to stop. At first, it may begin as regret, something honest, something human. But over time, regret can slowly become identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who made mistakes and start seeing yourself as someone who is the mistake. And once that happens, healing becomes difficult. Not because you don't want peace, but because part of you feels like peace must be earned through suffering. So every time life starts becoming lighter, you pull yourself back down again. You question your happiness. You doubt compliments. You struggle to enjoy good moments without hearing an inner voice whisper, "After everything you've done, how can you relax?" And that voice becomes familiar. Pain becomes familiar. Even self-punishment becomes familiar. That's why healing can actually feel uncomfortable at first. Because healing asks you to release the version of yourself built entirely around guilt. It asks you to believe that your worst moment does not deserve permanent control over your entire life. And honestly, that can feel terrifying. Carl Jung once wrote, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it." But acceptance is often misunderstood. Acceptance does not mean pretending nothing happened. It does not mean avoiding responsibility. It does not mean forgetting the people who were affected. Acceptance simply means you stop fighting reality. You stop mentally arguing with the past every single day. It happened. You regret it. You wish it had gone differently. But endlessly reopening the wound will not change the outcome. And eventually, you have to ask yourself a painful question. How much of your life are you willing to lose trying to punish yourself for what cannot be undone? Because there comes a point where shame stops teaching you anything new. It just keeps you emotionally trapped. You hesitate to move forward because you think you don't deserve another chance. You hold yourself back from connection because you fear becoming close to people again. You become overly critical of yourself in every situation because deep down, you already believe you are flawed. And after carrying that weight long enough, you begin to mistake suffering for honesty. But suffering is not the same thing as growth. Real growth is quieter than that. It looks like reflection, honesty, changed behavior, greater self-awareness, learning how to respond differently than you once did. Healing is not pretending the past never existed. Healing is finally understanding that destroying yourself forever will not repair it. And maybe the hardest part of healing is this: you must eventually allow yourself to become more than the worst thing you've done. One of the hardest things to accept is that sometimes you made painful choices while being a version of yourself that simply did not know better yet. Not because you were cruel, not because you wanted to destroy things, but because you were reacting from the level of awareness, pain, fear, and emotional understanding you had at the time. A lot of people look back at their past through the wisdom they gained later, and that's why they judge themselves so harshly. You look at old decisions with the knowledge you have now and think, how could I have acted that way? How could I not see what I was doing? How could I hurt someone like that? How could I ignore the signs? But the truth is, the person you are today exists because you learned from those moments. At the time, you may have been emotionally overwhelmed. You may have been afraid of rejection. You may have been carrying unresolved hurt you didn't understand yet. You may have been trying to survive emotionally in unhealthy ways without realizing the damage it caused. People who never learned how to communicate often shut down or lash out. People who spent years feeling unseen sometimes become defensive without meaning to. People who fear abandonment sometimes push others away before they can be hurt first. None of this erases responsibility. But understanding yourself honestly is different from hating yourself endlessly. There is a difference between saying, "What I did was wrong," and saying, "I am beyond forgiveness." Shame convinces people they are permanently broken. Growth reminds people they are capable of becoming different. And becoming different takes honesty, not self-destruction. Sometimes when you look back, you're not only grieving the mistake, you're grieving the version of yourself who was struggling silently at the time, the version who didn't know how to ask for help, the version who reacted emotionally instead of thoughtfully, the version who was carrying pain but pretending everything was fine, the version who kept making choices from fear because fear was all they understood. And maybe nobody ever taught that version of you how to handle emotions in a healthy way. Maybe nobody taught you how to slow down before reacting, how to communicate openly, how to sit with discomfort without escaping it, how to face insecurity without letting it control your behavior. So you learned through experience, through consequences, through regret, through loss. Pain became the teacher. And while that can be difficult to accept, it also means something important. The fact that you feel remorse now says something about who you are becoming. People who truly do not care rarely spend this much time reflecting. The guilt you carry often comes from awareness that arrived too late. And that lateness hurts. It hurts to realize you understand things now that you once ignored. It hurts to recognize behaviors you wish you could take back. It hurts to know you cannot return to the past and replace your old reactions with the wisdom you gained afterward. But healing begins when you stop expecting your past self to possess the emotional maturity your current self had to learn through pain. You were unfinished then, just like you are unfinished now. And that does not make you hopeless. It makes you human. The goal is not to defend the person you used to be. The goal is to understand them enough that you no longer need to hate them in order to keep growing. Shame changes the way you exist around other people, even when nobody says anything. Even when life looks normal from the outside, something inside you becomes more careful. You start thinking too much before speaking. You replay messages before sending them. You apologize for small things that don't even require an apology. because deep down, you become afraid of giving people another reason to leave, judge, or misunderstand you. And slowly, without noticing it at first, you stop showing people your full self. You hide certain emotions. You avoid certain conversations. You keep parts of your story locked away because you worry that if people truly knew everything about you, they would see you differently. So you begin managing your image all the time. You try to be extra kind, extra helpful, extra understanding. Not always because it comes naturally, but because somewhere inside you, there's still this quiet feeling that you need to make up for who you used to be. And that pressure becomes exhausting. Because no matter how much you do, shame always whispers that it still isn't enough. Sometimes this fear shows up in relationships. You struggle to trust people when they care about you. You question compliments. You become suspicious of kindness. A part of you keeps waiting for the moment someone discovers your flaws and changes their mind about you. So instead of relaxing into connection, you stay emotionally guarded. You hold back your thoughts. You avoid vulnerability. You pretend you're okay, even when you're struggling. Because being fully seen feels dangerous now. And the painful part is that many people don't even realize shame is controlling their behavior. They think they're just bad at opening up, or naturally distant, or not emotional. But often, underneath all of that, there's simply fear. Fear that their mistakes permanently damaged their worth. Fear that love becomes unstable once people see the imperfect parts. Fear that if they stop hiding, they will no longer be accepted. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And that happens to so many people. They believe life is just repeating painful patterns. But they don't realize unresolved shame is quietly shaping their choices behind the scenes. You avoid opportunities because you already expect failure. You pull away from closeness because rejection feels inevitable. You become overly independent because depending on people feels unsafe. And after a while, loneliness becomes familiar. Not always physical loneliness. Sometimes you can be surrounded by people and still feel emotionally hidden. Because when shame lives inside you, it becomes difficult to believe anyone could fully accept the real version of you. So you wear emotional armor everywhere. You become the strong one, the funny one, the helpful one, the calm one. Anything except fully honest. But constantly hiding parts of yourself creates another kind of pain. You start feeling disconnected, even in moments of closeness. You begin wondering why relationships feel emotionally distant. You crave understanding while simultaneously fearing it. And that inner conflict becomes heavy. Part of you wants connection deeply. Another part wants to protect itself from exposure at all costs. That's what shame does. It convinces you that being known is dangerous. But healing slowly teaches something different. The people who truly care about you are not looking for perfection. They are looking for honesty, growth, presence, humanity. And maybe the real turning point begins the moment you stop asking, "How do I hide my flaws better?" and start asking, "What would happen if I stopped treating my imperfections like proof that I am unworthy of love?" There comes a moment in healing that is very quiet. No dramatic breakthrough, no sudden transformation, no perfect sense of closure, just exhaustion. A deep emotional exhaustion from carrying the same guilt every single day. You get tired of replaying old memories before falling asleep, tired of reopening wounds that never fully heal because you keep touching them, tired of talking to yourself like someone who deserves permanent punishment. And one day, somewhere in the middle of an ordinary moment, a thought appears. I can't keep living like this. Not because the past suddenly stopped hurting, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally realize your suffering has gone on longer than the lesson needed to. For so long, you believed pain was necessary. You believed that if you kept hurting enough, maybe it would somehow balance the scales. Maybe it would prove your regret was real. Maybe it would undo what happened. But it never did. The past remained unchanged, no matter how many nights you spent blaming yourself. And slowly, you begin understanding something painful but important. There is a difference between learning from pain and living inside it forever. At some point, the guilt stops helping you grow. It just keeps you emotionally trapped in the same place. You start noticing how much of your life has been spent mentally looking backward. Even during good moments, part of your mind is somewhere else, in an old conversation, an old decision, an old version of yourself you can no longer change. And that constant emotional weight becomes heavy enough that eventually you stop asking, "How do I punish myself more?" and start asking, "How do I finally breathe again?" That question changes something inside you, because for the first time, healing becomes more important than punishment. You begin realizing that carrying endless shame has not made you wiser. It has only made you harsher toward yourself. You become aware of how automatically your mind attacks you, how quickly you dismiss your progress, how difficult it has become to accept peace without feeling guilty for it. And maybe that's when compassion begins. Not all at once, not perfectly, but slowly. You start recognizing that the person you were years ago is not the exact same person sitting here now. You see the ways you've changed, the ways you communicate differently, the ways you notice emotional patterns now that you once ignored. You realize your regret shaped you. And while you wish the lesson had come another way, the growth is still real. Maybe now you pause before reacting. Maybe now you take responsibility faster. Maybe now you care more deeply about how your actions affect others. Those changes matter. They are proof that your pain did not pass through you without teaching you something. And eventually, you begin understanding that accountability was never supposed to become lifelong self-hatred. The goal was awareness, growth, change, not emotional imprisonment forever. Carl Jung once wrote, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. And maybe that is the moment this quote finally begins to make sense. Because healing is not about pretending the past never existed. It is about deciding that your entire future does not need to remain chained to it. You can carry regret and still move forward. You can acknowledge harm and still deserve peace. You can accept responsibility without destroying your own worth. And maybe the strongest thing you can eventually say to yourself is this: I have suffered enough to understand. I do not need to suffer forever to prove it. Many people don't realize how cruel their inner voice has become. Not because they are bad people, but because they have spent so many years blaming themselves that harshness now feels normal. You make one small mistake and immediately attack yourself. You remember your past and instantly feel embarrassed. You compare yourself to others and quietly decide you are somehow less worthy than they are. And after repeating those thoughts long enough, they stop sounding like opinions. They start sounding like truth. You begin speaking to yourself in ways you would never speak to another human being. You ruin everything. You never change. You're difficult to love. You should have known better. And maybe part of you believes this harshness is necessary. Maybe you think being hard on yourself keeps you accountable. Maybe you think kindness would make you careless. Maybe you fear that if you stop criticizing yourself, you'll repeat the same mistakes again. But constant self-hatred does not create healthy growth. It creates fear, shame, emotional exhaustion. No one heals well in an environment of endless emotional punishment, even when that environment exists only inside their own mind. Carl Jung once wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That quote matters because it reminds you that your identity is not permanently frozen at your worst moment. You are still becoming, still learning, still changing, still understanding things your past self could not fully see yet. And learning to speak to yourself differently is part of that growth, not by pretending everything was okay, not by avoiding responsibility, but by finally speaking to yourself with honesty and humanity at the same time. Because there is a difference between accountability and cruelty. Accountability says, "What I did hurt people. I need to grow from this." Cruelty says, "I will never deserve peace again." One creates change. The other destroys self-worth. And many people have lived so long with shame that compassion toward themselves feels uncomfortable at first, almost unnatural. You may not even know what a healthy inner voice sounds like anymore. So when you try to be kinder to yourself, another voice immediately interrupts. You're making excuses. You're avoiding responsibility. You don't deserve compassion. But healing is not the absence of accountability. Healing is learning how to hold yourself responsible without emotionally abandoning yourself. Sometimes that begins with very small changes. Instead of saying, "I'm a failure," you begin saying, "I made a mistake." Instead of saying, "I always ruin things," you begin saying, "I handled that poorly, but I can learn from it." These small shifts matter more than people realize. Because your mind listens to the way you speak to yourself. And if every thought is filled with shame, eventually you stop believing growth is even possible. That hopelessness becomes dangerous. You stop trying, stop trusting yourself, stop believing you deserve healthy relationships, peace, or happiness. But self-forgiveness starts the moment you understand that growth requires compassion too. Not soft excuses, not denial. Compassion. The kind that says, yes, I regret what happened. Yes, I wish I had done better. But I am still human, and I am still worthy of becoming better. That is not weakness. That is emotional maturity. Because truly, facing yourself without hatred takes strength. And maybe one of the most healing things you can do is stop speaking to yourself like you are beyond repair. You are not a permanent mistake. You are a person who has suffered, learned, reflected, and is still trying to grow. And that version of you deserves a voice that helps you heal instead of keeping you trapped in shame forever. Part of healing is grief. Not only grief for what happened, but grief for the version of yourself you used to be. Sometimes people think healing is only about moving on, but they don't realize how much sadness can exist inside personal growth. Because when you truly change, something inside you changes with it forever. You begin looking back at old memories differently. Old conversations feel heavier. Certain moments suddenly carry meaning they did not carry before. And sometimes, the hardest part is realizing you cannot go back and become the person you were before the mistake happened. That version of you is gone. Maybe you miss the innocence you once had. Maybe you miss how lightly you used to carry yourself. Maybe you miss the time before guilt became part of your daily thoughts. There is pain in realizing that certain experiences permanently changed the way you see yourself. You may even grieve the years you lost living in survival mode, the years spent hiding, the years spent punishing yourself instead of healing. And sometimes you grieve the relationships that changed because of your choices, not only because you miss the people, but because you miss who you were with them. That kind of grief is difficult to explain. It's strange to miss versions of yourself that no longer exist. The younger version who didn't fully understand consequences yet. The version who still believed life would be simpler. The version who had not yet experienced deep regret. And sometimes, when people say they hate their past self, what they actually feel underneath is sadness. Sadness that they were hurting. Sadness that they were emotionally lost. Sadness that they didn't know how to handle things differently at the time. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Because complete self-acceptance means facing every version of yourself honestly. The immature version, the fearful version, the version who hurt others, the version who was struggling silently, the version who made choices they now deeply regret. And instead of denying those versions existed, healing asks you to look at them with understanding, not approval. Understanding. Because if you only view your past self with hatred, you never truly process the pain underneath the behavior. You only keep attacking yourself. But grief softens people in a different way. It allows you to finally admit, I was lost. I was emotionally overwhelmed. I was trying to cope in unhealthy ways. I did not fully understand myself yet. That honesty matters, because healing is not about pretending your past self was perfect. It is about recognizing they were human, and human beings are unfinished. That is something many people forget when they look backward. They expect their younger selves to have the emotional maturity they only developed later through experience, consequences, and reflection. But growth usually comes after the mistake, not before it. Pain teaches. Regret teaches. Loss teaches. And while those lessons can feel heavy, they also shape who you become afterward. The person sitting here today is not identical to the person who made those choices years ago. You think differently now. You notice things differently now. You carry more awareness now. And maybe that awareness came painfully, but it is still real. That's why healing often feels like saying goodbye to an old identity. You slowly stop introducing yourself internally as the one who ruined everything, the selfish one, the failure, the person who always hurts people. And you begin understanding that your past is a chapter of your life, not the final definition of who you are. Yes, that version of you existed, but they are not the only version of you that will ever exist. And maybe healing truly begins the moment you stop treating your old self like an enemy and start seeing them as someone who desperately needed growth, understanding, and change. One of the quietest forms of suffering is believing you should have been better all along. Better decisions, better reactions, better emotional control, better judgment. You replay the past and think, if I had been wiser, none of this would have happened. And little by little, you create an impossible standard for yourself. A standard where you were never supposed to struggle, never supposed to fail, never supposed to hurt anyone, never supposed to lose your way emotionally. But human beings do not grow through perfection. They grow through experience. And sometimes experience arrives painfully. That doesn't mean the damage was okay. It doesn't mean consequences disappear. But it does mean mistakes are part of being human, not proof that you are permanently broken. The problem is that shame makes imperfection feel unacceptable. It convinces you that every mistake says something final about your worth. So instead of seeing yourself as a person learning through life, you begin seeing yourself as a problem that needs to be fixed completely before deserving peace. And that mindset becomes exhausting. You become overly critical of yourself. You overthink everything you say. You fear disappointing people because failure already feels emotionally unbearable. Even small mistakes start reopening old wounds. A forgotten message, a misunderstanding, a bad day. Suddenly, your mind connects it back to every past regret you still carry. Because deep down, part of you still believes, if I were truly good, I wouldn't make mistakes at all. But that belief is impossible to live under. No one moves through life without hurting someone unintentionally. No one handles every situation perfectly. No one always reacts from wisdom instead of emotion. People misunderstand each other. People act from fear. People make choices before they fully understand themselves. That is part of being human. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Growth is uncomfortable because awareness is uncomfortable. You begin seeing things you once ignored. You recognize patterns you once defended. You become aware of emotional wounds you carried into your decisions. And while that awareness can hurt deeply, it also means you are evolving. The painful truth is that people often become kinder, wiser, and more emotionally aware because they experienced regret, not because they avoided it completely. And maybe that is difficult to accept because you wish your growth had arrived another way. You wish you could have learned gently, without hurting anyone, without losing parts of yourself in the process. But life rarely teaches people that perfectly. Sometimes the lesson arrives after the damage, after the failure, after the relationship changes, after the moment you wish you could undo. And for a long time, you may punish yourself for that. You may believe your mistakes permanently disqualified you from peace. But healing begins when you stop demanding perfection from a human life. You were always going to have blind spots. You were always going to have moments where fear, insecurity, anger, or confusion affected your choices. That does not make you hopeless. It makes you unfinished, and unfinished people are still capable of change. That's what self-forgiveness really asks of you. Not denial, not excuses, just the willingness to stop measuring your entire worth by your worst moments. Because if every mistake becomes proof that you are unlovable, you will spend your entire life emotionally fighting yourself. And eventually, you realize something important. The goal was never to become perfect. The goal was to become more aware, more honest, more responsible, more compassionate than you were before. Perfection cannot be sustained by human beings, but growth can. And maybe making peace with imperfection means finally understanding that being flawed does not cancel your value as a person. It simply means you are still learning, like everyone else. A lot of people imagine healing as one big moment. A sudden breakthrough, a powerful realization, a day where all the pain finally disappears at once. But most of the time, letting go happens quietly. So quietly that you almost don't notice it at first. It starts in small moments. You go an entire afternoon without replaying the past. You remember an old mistake without immediately attacking yourself. You laugh without feeling guilty for it afterward. And maybe those moments seem small to other people. But to someone carrying shame for years, they matter deeply. Because healing is not always dramatic. Sometimes healing is simply no longer reopening the same wound every day. For a long time, you may have believed that holding on to pain was necessary. You thought, if I let go, maybe it means I didn't care enough. If I stop hurting, maybe I'm excusing what happened. If I forgive myself, maybe I'll become careless again. So you stayed emotionally attached to your guilt, not because you enjoyed suffering, but because suffering felt connected to responsibility. But eventually, you begin realizing something important. You can remember the lesson without living inside the punishment forever. That realization changes the way you carry your past. You stop turning every memory into evidence against yourself. You stop speaking about your mistakes as if they define your entire identity. You stop believing that one painful chapter deserves control over your whole life. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because complete self-acceptance means facing every imperfect part of yourself honestly, without deciding you are beyond repair. It means acknowledging, yes, I regret things. Yes, I hurt people. Yes, I wish I had known better." And still believing your life can continue meaningfully after that. That is difficult for many people, because shame often becomes familiar. People build entire identities around regret, entire routines around self-punishment, entire emotional patterns around guilt. So when healing begins, it can actually feel unfamiliar. You may notice yourself waiting for the guilt to return, waiting for the inner criticism to start again, waiting for peace to disappear because you no longer trust it fully yet. But slowly, letting go starts looking like softness instead of punishment. You become more patient with yourself. You stop expecting perfection every day. You allow yourself to exist without constantly apologizing for your past. And maybe for the first time in years, your mind becomes quieter. Not empty, not free from memory, just quieter. The shame no longer controls every moment. You begin understanding that healing does not erase accountability. It simply removes the belief that you deserve endless emotional suffering forever. Sometimes, letting go also means accepting that not every situation will be repaired perfectly. Some people may never fully understand your growth. Some relationships may remain distant. Some consequences may stay permanent. And that reality hurts. But healing teaches you that closure is not always about fixing everything externally. Sometimes, closure is internal. It is the moment you stop defining yourself entirely by what happened. The moment you stop waking up every day as your own enemy. The moment you finally understand that carrying guilt forever will not rewrite the past. It will only prevent you from fully living the life still in front of you. And maybe letting go is not about forgetting at all. Maybe it is about remembering differently. Remembering with honesty instead of hatred. With reflection instead of self-destruction. With wisdom instead of endless punishment. Because eventually, you realize something very human. You cannot build a peaceful future while remaining emotionally chained to every version of your past self forever. At some point, you have to allow yourself to move forward, not because the past no longer matters, but because you matter too. There comes a point in healing where you slowly realize You are not the same person anymore. Not suddenly, not perfectly, but quietly, over time. Your reactions begin changing. Your thoughts begin softening. The things that once controlled you emotionally no longer hold the same power. And one day, you notice something surprising. You are no longer waking up every morning ready to fight yourself. So many people overlook their own transformation because they are too focused on who they used to be. They keep introducing themselves internally through old pain. I'm the one who ruined everything. I'm the selfish one. I'm the failure. I'm the difficult one. But healing asks you to stop speaking about yourself as if your story ended at your lowest point. Your life continued after that. You continued after that. You learned. You reflected. You suffered. You changed. That matters. And maybe becoming someone new is not about becoming flawless. Maybe it is about becoming more honest with yourself, more emotionally aware, more compassionate, more responsible with the hearts of others and with your own. Pain changes people, but healing changes people too. There is a softer version of you trying to emerge underneath all the guilt. A calmer version, a wiser version, a version that no longer needs self-hatred in order to stay accountable. And that version deserves a chance to exist. For a long time, you may have believed that forgiving yourself meant ignoring the seriousness of the past. But forgiveness is not pretending nothing happened. It is acknowledging what happened without deciding you deserve lifelong punishment for it. It is saying, yes, I regret parts of my life. Yes, I wish I had done some things differently. But I cannot keep destroying myself over what I cannot change anymore. That is not weakness. That is emotional courage. Because many people stay trapped in shame simply because it feels familiar. Healing requires entering something unfamiliar, a life where you no longer define yourself entirely by regret, a life where you can remember the past without emotionally collapsing into it, a life where peace becomes possible again. And maybe for the first time in years, you begin feeling present in your own life. You laugh more naturally. You stop assuming every good thing will disappear. You become less defensive, more open, more patient with people, because you understand human imperfection differently now. Even your relationship with yourself begins changing. You stop speaking internally with constant cruelty. You stop treating every mistake like proof that you are broken. You stop expecting yourself to carry endless punishment forever. And instead, you begin approaching yourself with honesty and humanity at the same time. Carl Jung wrote, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it." And acceptance is where your new life quietly begins. Not by denying the past, not by rewriting it, but by finally looking at yourself fully and saying, that version of me existed. That version made mistakes. That version caused pain. But that version is not all I am. You are still becoming, still growing, still learning things about yourself, still changing in ways your past self could not yet imagine. And maybe that is the most hopeful part of being human. No matter how much regret you carry, you are not permanently trapped inside the person you used to be. You are allowed to evolve beyond your worst moments. You are allowed to heal beyond your shame. You are allowed to become someone new. If you have been carrying shame for a long time, you probably became used to surviving quietly, smiling while hurting, functioning while exhausted, telling yourself you were fine while constantly fighting old memories inside your mind. And maybe nobody fully saw how heavy it became for you, because shame is often invisible. Other people may see your progress while you still see your mistakes. They may see your kindness while you still focus on your failures. They may see how much you've changed while you remain emotionally attached to who you used to be. That is what unresolved guilt does. It keeps pulling your attention backward. But healing begins the moment you understand that your life cannot grow if your identity remains trapped in the past forever. You are not meant to spend your entire existence apologizing for who you once were. Yes, your past matters. Yes, your choices mattered. Yes, reflection and accountability matter deeply. But your suffering does not need to last forever in order for your growth to be real. Carl Jung once wrote, "Even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness." Every human life contains moments people wish they could redo. Moments of confusion, moments of fear, moments where pain affected decisions in ways they only understood later. That does not make you uniquely broken. It makes you human. And maybe part of becoming emotionally whole is accepting that you can be both. A person who regrets certain things and a person still worthy of peace. Those truths can exist together. You do not need to erase your past to move forward. You do not need to become perfect to deserve healing. You do not need to hate yourself forever to prove you have changed. Real change is already visible in the way you reflect now, in the way you think more carefully now, in the way you carry more awareness now than you once did. Growth often happens quietly, not through dramatic moments, but through small daily choices. Choosing honesty instead of avoidance. Choosing reflection instead of denial. Choosing compassion instead of endless self-punishment. And maybe the most important thing is this. Your story did not end at your worst moment. No matter how deeply you regret parts of your life, there is still a future version of you waiting to exist. A calmer version, a wiser version, a more peaceful version. Someone who remembers the past without being destroyed by it. Someone who understands that mistakes shaped them, but no longer define them completely. Someone who finally stopped asking, "How long should I punish myself?" and started asking, "How do I live fully now?" Because healing is not about becoming someone who never failed. Healing is about becoming someone who faced their failures honestly and still chose to keep growing. And if you are still here, still trying, still reflecting, still searching for peace despite everything you carry, then there is already something deeply hopeful about you. You have not given up on becoming better. And that may be the beginning of finally forgiving yourself.